So I'm not saying that we don't have an enforcement avenue. I'm saying that to make it fully legitimate, you would have both the interlocal, which says they are responsible for enforcing our ordinances, and an ordinance which gives them the authority to do so.
Because I'm hesitant to pass the interlocal until we establish some history, quite honestly, with the ordinance. You know, I think we've had numerous discussions on this and that and the other, and that, you know, you and I have talked about the KRS definition of animal enforcement, and I guess me personally, I'm hesitant to go on and pass the interlocal until we establish the ground rules on the enforcement of the ordinances, and see some of that happen.
Well, I can understand your desire to see the law established, and I agree, but I don't know that it's fair to ask somebody to do something without a written agreement to do it. I mean, I would understand their hesitation in saying you're asking us to enforce your ordinance, but you're not giving us the written agreement by which we're tasked to do it. You're just kind of asking us to do it.
But they're cashing a check.
That's true. That's true. So if they're willing to do it, they're willing to do it, and that's fine. But neither party has the protections of the agreement. You know, part of that is protection for us as far as the budget goes. I can understand your hesitation. I think the two are a package. They go together. But and I can't speak for the county. If the county is willing to do it without the agreement, then so be it.
Well, at least should be postponed until after to pass the ordinance first, instead of asking us to pass the resolution first. At least should have the ordinance passed first, and then take the ordinance once it's passed to the county to see if they are willing to enforce what we're asking them to do before we come back, and then that at least come back to us, and then go back to the resolution and then the reading of the ordinance control, because we need they're okay to say, yes, we're going to do this to the best of our abilities, blah, 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 and then it come back to us and say, okay, then we're going to do the first reading of the animal control, and then we're going to do the resolution to support it.
I can understand that argument.
These documents are a product of both Mr. Williams and Andrew.
Well, but we thought that last time, Mayor.
Well, in which order would you like them? Sure, absolutely.
I spent almost 2 years on the interlocal agreement, getting to the point where we could have in the Department of Local Government an interlocal agreement that needed to be signed. And in the process of that, up until this last meeting, we have established that the ordinances do not have enough teeth in it for anyone, the across the street, animal control, or even our code enforcement, to be able to enforce. So now we have asked them to get the interlocal agreement done, to get the ordinance done, and there's no reason why they can't go hand in hand. When I sat at that meeting on that day, Wednesday I think it was, Andrew and Glenn put the words together to put it together to make it enforceable, and left with the impression that they were going to do that and give animal control the right to do citations, give them the tools that they needed, and know that the police department was going to be back up if they needed code enforcement. So I'm not inclined to not vote for the interlocal agreement, and I want to vote for the ordinance, and I'm going to stand by and do what I've been doing for these past 2 years.
Any other comments?
Andrew, question. The phrase all city ordinances, it says the Animal Control Service shall have the power to enforce all city ordinances regarding animals and animal control. What exactly, I mean, all city ordinances, can you give a summary? There's a leash law, barking dog, so-called pooper scooper ordinance.
We've got the entire ordinance here. Well, actually, we don't. You have the amendment.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah, we have the amendment, but
well,
is that
would include everything in the animal chapter. chapter 3. I apologize, I don't have the entire thing before me. You know, it's funny that you ask about leash law. We don't strictly per se have a leash law.
Really?
What we have, if you read it, it says something to the effect of that the dog must either be on a leash or within the immediate control of the owner. And it specifies by verbal command or something else. And it's essentially, we don't have a strict leash law. You know, if the dog is obeying the owner's command,
Do we have,
they're technically compliant with that.
do we have a law? I mean, is that the ordinance cited, or is it the state law cited when a dog is running loose in the city? When a dog's
both.
Both.
It's both. We do have an ordinance that prohibits dogs running at large.
Running a lot. There's also a state law too.
There's also a state law that talks about it. So in some cases, it would be violations of both.
Okay.
What has stood in the way of animal control enforcing our ordinance has been one of the chief things that has bothered Judge Lusby. So, with the documents we have in place now, we're giving animal control the authority to cite. So,
I guess this is more a point maybe for the ordinance itself, but I guess the biggest question I have is why is it taking this long to discover that our ordinances are deficient? I mean, how many complaints have we had over the years? And I know we can always say, well, that's water under the bridge, but I kind of come back to the idea that this is a service issue more than anything else, rather than the ordinance problem might be a symptom of it, but I think underlying it's a service issue. I mean, how was this not told to us, told to a citizen, somehow communicated to council and the fiscal court so that something could have been done about this in the past?
My take on it is that it comes down to a fundamental difference in the way we value animal enforcement. And that is, I said this in the Interlocal Committee meeting, we are a city of an urban character, and animal enforcement, animal control has different value for us than it does for a rural area. Mm-hmm. And when you have the entity that's in charge of the rural area doing the enforcement, they may not have the same goals and expectations that does the city. And I think this is the first time that we've been able to really identify the source of that difference. And I really do think that it comes down to, we as a city expect that barking dog calls get taken care of in a certain way, and the folks at the county do it differently. And this is us saying, if we want to continue that working relationship we have, then there needs to be a change. And I think it's honestly as simple as that. I think that you can go over history about why it got where it was, and you can probably talk about it for days. My job is to try to figure out what the problem is and how we can fix it going forward, and I think this is it.
No, I'm not looking for a history lesson. I think I'm looking for the assurance that this is going to change the basic character of animal control in relation to the enforcement of city ordinances. It's still a question in my mind whether or not this is a job better equipped for the police department. Because I'll take an example from work. Like back about 10 or 12 years ago, we noticed that a lot of people were coming to the library and asking the clerks where they could find notary services. And it got to the point where the clerks said, approached management, approached the directors, and said, we should maybe provide this service here. And so we trained somebody about 10 years ago to provide notary service. And it got to be so big that we actually have trained 5 or 6 people, where you virtually are guaranteed that if you show up at the library during working hours, you're going to avail yourself of notary service. And I guess the lesson there is that there was a little bit of proactiveness there, proactivity, if you want to use that word, in terms of seeing a customer need and moving it up the food chain. I can't understand for the life of me why we haven't had, when a barking dog call has occurred, that the ordinances, that the discovery, when somebody is asked, a neighbor, for example, the guy up in Bradford the other day, asked for them to be enforced, or all the pig calls. It hasn't moved its way up the food chain to say, hey, our ordinances are insufficient to have any sort of enforcement provision. I think that's the big question. And whereas it's a service issue at my work regarding notary service, this is a service issue regarding enforcement of city ordinances by a county agency.
Sure.
I think that's the biggest question I got.
I think we are where we are today and getting the paperwork we're getting because this body, to my recollection, is the first body that's ever questioned the interlocal agreement and the ordinance.
Well-
And dealing with what you just said.
Right, that's true, except for the fact that the difference between, I guess, a notary and a barking dog is that the fact that either animal control, code enforcement, or the police department has to observe that barking dog, actually hear that barking dog, in order to write a citation or something like that.
I wasn't trying to draw an analogy between the notary
I
and
know, but
barking
I'm
dog.
just saying, that's why they've never been
I know what you're
enforced. Or that was my understanding from that meeting.
But
that
it's
they
a
had
question
to
of
observe.
communication from animal control, the officers, on up to the judge, the directors, on up to council and the fiscal court, in the same way that it happened 10 years ago at my work. And that's the issue. That's the analogy I was trying to draw. And it wasn't them telling us; it's been citizens telling us. I mean, it's been people calling me and saying, "I got a barking dog. I got a pig living next to me. They tell me they can't enforce the ordinance. Can you find out about it?" And when citizens are calling me, that's when I think we've got a real problem. I mean, I go back to the fact that this is a customer service issue.
Well, you may be surprised, but we have customer service issues in every single department that we have. And, we can choose to, I guess, exaggerate the issues, blow them out of proportion. And I'm not
exaggerating
necessarily
the
saying this is, okay? But that's what we can do. And, I've listened to issues regarding animal control when it was called the Dog Pound, and it was located on Elkhorn Creek. And Charlie Perkins was talking about it. I mean, we've been through a lot of city attorneys since that time. And I mean, we can keep beating this issue like a dog. But
Don't be dogs.
I really think we need to move
goodness.
forward. I'm going to ask a simple question. Andrew, you've been involved in these discussions since you've been involved in city government here in Georgetown. Do you feel that this is the most appropriate and correct step for us to take to move forward and to give this ordinance some teeth and some progress, some bite?
There's no question that this is the correct step to take. There's also no question that we are taking a leap of faith, that the county will agree to do what they have said openly that they will do. There is no crystal ball to determine whether or not they're going to enforce it, but we have put in the tools that we collectively have determined are necessary to effectuate our goals.
And
I
that
have to have
hasn't been
faith in that.
present in the past.
I agree. I think that we have never truly had a coming together of the minds to talk about what animal enforcement really means and how to put that on paper in a way that is enforceable and that they are willing to do. And I think that we have that in this case.
But are we not locked in for 6 months, or for a year, that let's say we do this, we try it for 6 months and it's just still not working? Are we not legally locked in until the end of that budget year?
Nope.
Mm-mm.
Well,
Wait a minute.
If we
what
sign
this-
this agreement, we do put in
Yeah.
a year termination
You put in
provision.
a year termination, but in January, can't you give your notice that if it's not done in the next 6 months or whatever, that you can let them know that you're gonna work on another?
Yeah, but that's a
alternative?
year. You're in 6 months and it's not working, and so then you're locked into it for another 6 years, 6 months of it not working, and there's nothing that you can do. And you
Okay.
still got citizens
Well,
that are calling.
The way to solve that is then you put some other language in there that gives you another out.
What
Into
we've been
this.
doing up
Yeah.
until the point where we are now hasn't been working either.
Well, then I suggest that we put other language into this that allows a different out, that if at the end of, and give it 6 months because you need some time, that if it's not, that we don't have to wait to the end of that budget year to make a difference. And another question I've got for you, what is the funding? We're supposed to fund 50% of the daily expenses approved by the budget, and then the cost plus the cost attendance of employees of 2 full-time employees.
Right.
Is that right?
Yes.
But then over here, and I may be reading it wrong. So on the obligation to the CRS, down here it says shall be responsible for 100% of all sums for 2 full-time employees and 50% of the sums of 2 additional full-time employees. What's that? Is that not different?
I think that's what it was, and it's,
Yeah.
But isn't
we're
that
going to 2.
But isn't that supposed to be corrected
Yeah, that is
before
supposed to
we?
be corrected.
It is,
You are
it is.
correct.
All right, well, that's
I
a
didn't realize-
substantial difference, and I would postpone this at least and have the first reading on next Monday.
That was, they're certainly aware of that already because that was their suggestion.
And that's a great suggestion, but it's not in what we were wanting to vote on.
Well, I appreciate you catching that. I mean,
All we need is a line drawn through it.
sure.
And then there's just another question, and this you'll have to have the answer. It says on 7.1, our assets. And I don't think we have any assets. It says 7.1 city assets. The city retains 100% ownership of the following properties. Is there anything there? Is there?
No, we put that provision in there in standard. It's just to fill in the blank.
We got nothing?
They own the
Not
shelter.
animal control that we do in the 911.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
So none of the hard assets, none of the.
well, look at the next paragraph.
The next one says that the county's
7. Look at the previous paragraph.
Okay.
With the exception of the properties listed in 7.1, all assets heretofore acquired and hereafter acquired shall be owned jointly. So what that is a carve-out paragraph.
So does that mean anything they build in the future, then we're half?
Yes, if
We
we funded
will-
half, then we own half of it.
Okay, so any building or anything in the future that gets built, then the city is liable for half of that building, and we also get credit for having half that
Sure,
building.
unless we have some other agreement in writing.
Okay. Well,
You could always amend this agreement to say we're carving it, the county's going to build it, or the city's going to build it, and we're carving it out.
I would carve that. I mean, that would be something on this to carve out. And if the county wants to build something, let them build it. But that locks us into sharing that expense of building with them. When I agree sharing if we want to share the expense of housing, but not the sharing of the
Well, but-
expense of building. Isn't that what
Right
that
now,
kind of
there's
says?
nothing in there. I mean, you would want you want to share if you're funding everything half and half. You want to share half in the ownership of everything that you're buying.
But this is the daily expenses. This is not, this line talks about if it's a building property is what it's referring. This up here, what our funding is daily expensive. That doesn't mean building a building.
Any change to this document would have to be approved by both bodies.
Because according to this, we wouldn't finance any capital expenditures.
Right.
Well, then we
I
can
mean, I'm
take that
fine with
out.
that.
If we don't want to own half of the animal shelter equipment, then we can just take it out and we can own none of it.
But we don't now, and that will lock us in if we decide we want, if with this in here of owning the assets from future assets, and that's already saying that the city of Georgetown is in agreement to whatever you want to build out there or expand or whatever, and we may not be in agreement, but because of the interlocal, it puts us in that
I
agreement.
don't agree. I don't agree that it locks us into.
Okay.
I just think that it says that
Well, let's,
items purchased with a shared budget are jointly owned. That's
Well, let's go back a few years when we had a fire station that happened to be out in Sadieville that the county, because of the interlocal agreement we had then, the county locked us into paying for half of the fire station out there. So, yes, from past history of how we've done based on interlocals, it could be argued, and I'll say could be argued to put us into, if they decide to expand the building out there, that we're going to pay for half of building that building.
the way you control that is through the budget approval process that's in the interlocal, which says no budget shall be effective unless agreed to by both parties. They would have to put the purchase of that building in the budget, and the city would have to approve that. And if the city doesn't approve that, and it reverts back to last year's budget.
And historically, how it's happened before is because of what was in the interlocal, it was put into the budget, and then it was kind of felt like the council forced upon us to do that.
Sure.
And because of it being stated in the interlocal, which we supported, so.
I think the
we bought an
interlocal,
ambulance because of that.
if anything, the interlocal gives you the out. Whereas if you have no agreement, it's you take it or leave it.
I'll remind you, and Brad, you probably don't recall this, but we were going to go in and jointly fund a fire training facility, and we kind of drug our feet on it, and the county said, "Hey, that's all right, we'll fund it. You can use it whenever you want." And that facility's out on 25 right now at our use. So, you say one thing, but you got to, it's not fair if you don't throw out the whole picture. And I don't know the whole picture, but none of us really know the whole picture. But that's a good example. I mean, I understand what you're saying on one hand, but you got to look at the whole picture and the whole relationship, and that's what these interlocals are about, is a relationship. And it's good for both of us. And I don't care if we delay it, Andrew. If we need to delay it, if that's
We obviously got to make some changes. So, yeah, I mean, let's delay it. But I guess my point is, let's have the conversation about what we want in there.
Yeah, because we just keep
That's
dragging
right.
this
Well,
thing on.
if we fund something, don't we want some credit for that asset?
I would think so, but
Have we bought trucks and stuff like that, or are we
In the
part owners
past.
of that?
well, right now we don't have an agreement that governs that. So who knows?
Yes, we have, because in the past we've given money over there without accountability as to what's happening. This brings us more accountability, so that's a step in the right direction, but it's not ready yet because we're still putting
I
the
agree.
cart before the horse.
Well, I'm not trying to insist that we approve it, but let's have the conversation about what if we see shortcomings, let's get them fixed.
Okay, that's good.
Mayor, I got two questions. Number one, there was an issue brought up last meeting as far as that they're on a 40-hour week. Now, are they on call as far as animal control if you call them on the weekends? I mean, have we verified that?
Now, in the past, I don't know presently what its situation is. In the past, they have had on-call, because I remember one of our employees, that was a big sticking point with her.
Yeah, I
Because
remember.
she didn't live here.
Yeah.
I think you have to be careful of throwing out the term on call. It has different meanings depending on who you ask. When you're on call, you may be on duty. What I think you're asking is, if a situation arises where there's a animal cruelty issue, there's something severe that involves the police, and the police need animal control to step up and come in over the weekend, my understanding is that they would do that.
Barking dog call at 3 a.m., which I've gotten before.
I do
Saturday
not.
night.
I do not believe they would be on call for that. But I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
I think
But
that would be a situation that the police would answer that
but
call.
I think the issue is, I mean, if they're, and I'm surely they're not on a 40-hour week, but if they are on a 40-hour week, strictly 40-hour week, and we're spending $185 a year on it, that means extrapolating that out to 168-hour week. That means we're spending $777,000, or in theory would, either by paying animal control to do it during the regular work week and then paying the police department to do it during the rest of the week. I mean, we're on track to spend, at least in theory, that devote that amount of money or that amount of resources in some form or fashion during the fiscal year. My point is that if we're going to spend $185,000 to have the county provide these animal control services, let's make sure that they provide those services, that they're the ones that get the call whenever, and ideally to get as many animal control calls directed to the county rather than tax our police department. Other point I'd make, Mayor, is at the end of the day, this is just a budget issue, and it'll be addressed, and if the service is somehow deficient, it'll be addressed in the next budget and probably stricken out if the next council finds it deficient. Do not let this ever stop us from enforcing those city ordinances, especially barking dog. And if we have to have the police do it on the weekends, let's have the police do it and go from there. Okay? All right. Thanks.
Did the enforcement issue ever come up as a topic of conversation when we went through our pig and chicken hoorah?
Not enforcement of the general animal ordinances. Although, actually, I take that back. We may have discussed that at that point.
And it was never brought to our attention that what we were working so diligently to correct it was going to be unenforceable?
Well, the language that we put in regarding the pigs was enforceable. It was the rest of the what Glenn said made it unenforceable was having both civil and criminal penalties in there. Apparently, that doesn't work. And when it gets to a judge, the judge kind of gives it the no. But if you pick one, then you're all right. And the way to get citations written is through citations are criminal in nature. All I can tell you is that these changes make it enforceable.
And I understand that. I guess from the standpoint of where we were 4 months ago, we thought that was enforceable too. And in fact, we talked about that at length then. So.
I guess that's my question to council. It appears as though we want to delay this and make additional changes, or make sure that the dialogue or the wording is clear as possible. But is it the will of council that we want this to say that animal control will act, or they shall act? Because Andrew, you correct me if I'm wrong, at this point they can, if this was passed, they can make citations, but they don't have to. It's not.
You never want to take away a peace officer's discretion. Now, they're not peace officers, but they're citation officers. Mm-hmm. You say shall enforce, yes. But, that's broad language. If you say they shall issue a ticket, that's not a good thing. Okay. We are saying they shall. If I actually go a step further and give police and code enforcement the authority to enforce. I think that's important. Okay. This chapter shall be enforced by city police officers, code enforcement officers, and here's the key. I don't say it shall be enforced by animal control. Right. Shall be enforced by those persons or agencies designated by the city or applicable law. Right. Let's say we want to, in the future you want to designate someone else. I mean, what I'm getting at is this is the law. This gives people the authority to enforce, and then you've got the provision that says people we give that authority to by agreement have that. So without the agreement, I can put in there the reference to animal control, but I don't necessarily think it's appropriate.
Okay.
I think you reserve to yourself the right to give that authority to someone at will and to change it at will.
Sure. That makes sense. Then a follow-up question or concern is that, again, we're making decisions as the city's legislative body, and we want to express to the judge the seriousness of our concerns, so that if this moves forward with the correct language, or with that appropriate language, that the city ordinances are not dismissed simply because they're city versus county. And that's part of the agreement that I think we want to have between the city and the county.
What I agree. What language would you like to put in either the interlocal or in the ordinance that says more than what we said? Would be my question. I mean, do you want to spell out in detail what their jobs are, or do we want to say that there are consequences for not doing it? Or, I mean, I think that Karen's kind of hit on what the consequences would be. The consequences are, if we feel in 6 months that you're not enforcing our ordinances, then you have the right to back out of the agreement.
But I think in terms of language on that, I think if we determine that the city ordinances are not being followed, then we should be able to have an earlier out.
I
than-
understand. I think you can
than,
put that in there.
90 days prior to the termination of the fiscal year. I think we need,
What you're talking about is termination for cause.
exactly.
And we have had various agreements where we've put termination for cause. And I can stick that provision in there.
I would feel comfortable cutting that in half, 45 days.
Well, I mean, termination for cause should be a 30-day, as far as I'm concerned. I agree with you.
What would be a determination point?
No,
How do we go about determining whether or not it's being enforced?
well, you'll have citations. I mean, you would have citations or not if, I mean, that's
Is it
what.
going to be based on the number of citations we write?
No, it's going to be based probably on complaints and then whether citations are, whether it's being enforced, the ordinances are being enforced or not enforced.
Well,
Well,
the
like,
thing-
a pig's easy. A pig's easier than a dog. Not that I want you to go after pigs, but if Joe has his pig out there and that pig's still there after 45 days or whatever, well, that's easy. Unless there's some
That's
court that
entirely
has
different. Yes.
stopped you from taking the pig, then that's a pretty easy one.
I think the determining factor will be what we've been going through for the last 45 days.
Well.
It's the continued complaints that we're getting, and
I'm very hopeful it's going to cut down the number of calls we get here at City Hall. I don't know how many you guys
Good
get,
point.
but
Well, and you take
we
that,
get
I
a
think
bundle of them.
fundamentally, it comes back to communication between our two local governments, and comparing maybe what are complaints at City Hall or complaints via police department or 911, and communication or reports that the county can provide us. I don't know, on a monthly or quarterly basis from animal control, maybe. Does that improve our understanding of their actions and direction based on what we learn from them? They're not required to report to us, but
Sure.
at
Well,
this point. Right?
here's my thoughts on that is we've already had sort of an agreement between ourselves that if and when the animal control officers start issuing citations, that they're going to require a certain level of training. And Chief talked about what that training might entail, and I think even offered to give them sort of a course, a basic course. But I think when you're talking about citations and that being your primary method of enforcement, you're talking about criminal enforcement to some extent. And there has to be an adequate documentation and a paper trail of that. Whereas if they go up to the door of someone right now and say, please keep your dog quiet or we're going to come back, you don't have a paper trail of that. And I think that you will naturally see, or if you don't see, you will notice a hole. You will see the documentation of enforcement that is necessary for those citations to hold water in court.
On these citation stuff, when they go out for the first time to a barking dog, they will get a warning most likely. They can still put that down that they would at that address and stuff where they've been to show that they are.
They can,
Right.
and they should,
That
That's
is
what
your
I'm
paper
saying.
trail.
because
Right.
well, and
because
they're doing that now.
Yeah, but we're not seeing it though.
We don't know. We requested.
Well, I'm talking about on animal
you seen-
control
I mean-
in the city though.
Sure.
I've not seen enforcement. I've seen where they've gone and talked to the owner or something like that.
Right.
On the language for the termination on cause, I think it should be different than our just standard terminating by either party. I think with a cause termination, I don't think that we should give them. I don't think that we should commit to the end of the fiscal year. I mean, that's still a huge commitment. I think, like Mark said, 45 days, 30 days on the spot.
Sure. Well, I think you keep your termination, your plain termination.
Mm-hmm.
We're not terminating for cause. We're terminating just because we want out. And then you put in addition to that, your termination for cause, which allows you with reason, with some issue that you have to terminate earlier. And I'll put whatever time you want in there, but You know, I'm hearing a lot of numbers being thrown out. I don't want to guess.
Well, the committee, both committees agreed on the time frame that's in the ordinance now. And that's what was brought back to the full council. So it's up to you guys.
The only thing that I question and I asked, if you did terminate it in 30 days, in 30 days, if we've got barking dogs or we've got to pick them up or whatever, where we're going to house them, you're going to have something in place in 30 days?
What you're going to have is you're going to have another agreement that governs your relationship between the city and the county as far as the animal shelter, or we're going to have another animal shelter.
Right.
So,
I just want to
I mean, it's a valid question.
Do
I
our
mean, you
city
can't-
ordinances outside of the pig ordinance allow for confiscation of the dog?
Yes.
Or impoundment of the dog?
Yeah.
Which one?
I do think I have that here. Animals running at large or constituting a public nuisance may be taken by the city or its designated enforcement officers and impounded in an animal shelter in a humane manner.
And that's in our city ordinance, not in
Yes.
state law?
Yes.
But that's also undergirded in state law, isn't it, as far as dogs running it loose?
Yes,
Running loose.
to some extent. The public nuisance, no.
What's a public nuisance?
That would be. Wish I brought that. It's defined in our ordinance, and it's a whole list. It's being caught at large a number of times, or harassing other persons, barking incessantly. That's the nuisance is where the barking comes in. Chasing cars, biting other animals. You know, because biting another person is a violation of state law, but biting another animal is not. So that's a nuisance issue. It's things like that. And in other words, so we lump everything under the public nuisance, and we have the right to, in the officer's discretion, to impound an animal, whether it's a dog or any other kind of pet.
Okay. I think I understand.
I just have
Okay, do we want to take a vote on the ordinance to see where we are, or on the interlocal?
Did you want to?
yeah.
What? Go
I
ahead.
mean, we've got to come up with something to give us some guidelines as to how you, if you're not in agreement with what we have brought before you, then what changes do you want to make?
Before we ask that question, I just want to make one. I think you asked what would be the trigger as far as backing out of the agreement. I mean, what would be
Right,
what would be the things that would come up? I think, you know, first and foremost, you task animal control based on this agreement that animal control will be the sole enforcement agent of the city's code regarding, well, not the sole, but the first one that should be called, the first one to be relied upon as far as enforcement of city ordinances regarding animals. And if that's not, and the only person really on a daily basis that would know whether or not they're doing their job and whether we're having to rely on the police department would be the mayor's office. So I think probably your experience as far as fielding these calls, or the police fielding these calls, would be the clearest answer as far as whether we're getting our money's worth. I want to be clear that we need to make sure that we're enforcing these ordinances by hook or crook,
Absolutely.
and whether it's police department or animal control. But as far as whether we're getting our budget's money's worth out of animal control, that's really a question for the
And we're
executive
paying
branch.
for the enforcement.
Okay.
I have two. One's a question and one's a comment. On the section that's 3 on the services, it says the Georgetown Police Department shall provide support and assistance to animal control service when requested by the county sheriff or the animal control. Just curious as to when would they need?
They might not, but I can envision
because I don't want this there, if they're there in a situation just because maybe they don't want to deal with it, so they call
We
us.
can take that out because we already have a mutual aid agreement
Yeah.
with the sheriff anyway.
And-
I thought I would tie it specifically to
Well, I can see it,
animal.
there's a fantastic relationship now between the police and the sheriff, but I could see the sheriff being on the scene of, and could go on and handle it and end up calling us to come take care of it, instead. So, I would take that one out. And then the other thing about the termination, if we decide that we're not getting the service that we're needing for the citizens, then what we could do on it is, yes, terminate this agreement, but agree to go on and pay the 50% for the upkeep for the animals, but not be paying for the folks, because the thing we're most concerned about is enforcement of the ordinances. It's not the 50% that we're paying to the animal shelter that has anything to do with enforcement. It's the part of the ordinance or part of the agreement that has the employees. So, that might be on the out. We might do a 30-day out and continue to pay the money to the shelter, but not pay the money, the part of the budget, the money to the employees.
You're assuming that if we were to back out of this agreement, that they would be agreeable to that.
That's a good assumption.
That's a great assumption, but that's why.
Because the alternative to that is, okay, here's what it costs you per hour to house each animal taken from the city.
Well, that's a part of, they're going to agree with this too. That's why we do the ordinance, then we do this and send it over there to make sure they're in agreement with it to enforce this and then to agree to this. Because then we're saying this is what we think is going to be what we need to have it enforced, because that's the issue that we're most concerned with. If they send it over there and they say, well, you can't go out in 30 days and we're not going to agree for you to do that, well, then they don't sign it. And then we work on it again.
So you're saying that we should put in a provision that says if we were to terminate for cause, that we can just terminate the portion related to the employees?
Well, it's a question that came up with one of the council members of what do we do about housing the dogs after 30 days?
Yeah. We can suggest it. It just sounds like if I'm sitting in the county shoes, it sounds like the raw end of the deal.
Well, it sounds like sometimes we've gotten the raw end of the deal.
I understand.
Since we started paying for half of it, since no city ordinance has ever been enforced.
So I think you've got 8 council members that want something to happen, and I think you've got the magistrates that want something to happen too. But we got to come up with something that the citizens of Georgetown will get the response that they need, and they have it. So we're getting closer to getting there, but I don't think we're there quite yet.
Okay, what do you want? That's the question that keeps coming from the magistrates and the judge.
Well,
What does the council want in the ordinance?
enforcement of city ordinances, a out clause if it's not happening, that there be an out clause for the city that doesn't have to wait till the end of a budget cycle to have an out clause. And if the council's okay with, Andrew can tweak it in his legalese on how it would work, but to say that we would at that time would be willing to pay for the housing of the animals or willing to pay for half of the expenses, but not for the employees since we're not getting the enforcement, and then clean up a couple of the other things that are in here.
We need to give this an opportunity to work, because we are giving them the authority now to write citations, which they haven't had before. And the judge has always said, we as a county cannot enforce city ordinance. Now we're giving them, you as a body, are giving them the authority to do that. We can say it's absolutely going to work, or we can say there's no way it's going to work, or whatever. But until we give it an opportunity, we're not going to know. And we keep dragging on with this.
I think that
The
the
ironic,
day-
I'm sorry to cut you off, Connie. The ironic analogy there, Mayor, is I would like to have had our garbage pickup given a longer opportunity to work, to see if it was going to work. Go ahead, Connie.
Well, again, it was public, people calling in and giving everybody a hard time, so that's why it was terminated, and doing the same thing to the ordinance. And it's not that I don't agree with the termination, because I've been here time after time, coming up with something that would be workable, and figured the 90 days would be a good time. And in the 90 days, instead of 30, it would give you the opportunity to say, if you've gotta get your own animal shelter, if you got a contract with somebody or whatever, if you've got 90 days to do it instead of 30, because you know as well as I do, government does not move quick. It's slower than state. And the bottom line is that there's been compromises made, there's been meetings, the judge was the one that called the last meeting. He's been workable, everybody's been workable, we bring back the compromise, and then it's like, start nitpicking it, that it's not good enough, or it's not there, we wanna go back over there and, you know, give them like an ultimatum. Well, I don't care who anybody is, it's given an ultimatum, is not gonna take that ultimatum. Not one of us sitting here would do that with an ultimatum.
I don't see it as an ultimatum, though, Connie. I see it as us making sure that we're getting the services
I
provided
agree.
that we're getting for them. And with any other contractor, if we hired someone to sweep Main Street, and they weren't sweeping Main Street, we would want it out in that contract.
I agree,
And we
but-
wouldn't want it out 90 days prior to the end of the fiscal year.
And again, your analogy, a street sweeper, you're gonna get real quick, you can get them in 30 days.
Yeah.
But in 30 days, where are you gonna house something? And you give someone an ultimatum, I'm gonna give you 30 days, and then but we'll pay half the expenses, but we're gonna take the employees away, but we want you to take care of our dogs while we find a place to do it. I mean, really? Put yourself in their shoes. Would you do that?
Well, I guess
With
I'm
all of the
thinking-
alienation that's happened up to this point,
I'm
sorry.
thinking more on the lines of the citizens of Georgetown who's paid for 20 years for animal shelter and for our ordinances to be enforced, for them never to have been enforced.
You make
Well-
it sound like nothing's ever happened.
That's,
You know,
That's not a
that's
true
very,
analogy.
very misleading. I mean, that's spinning an issue is exactly what that is.
Andrew, do we have any record of any city animal ordinance ever?
Have they
being
provided a service? That's the bottom line. Have they provided a service? And the answer is yes. More service in the city than they have the county. I'm not even on the committee, and I know that.
Well, you know, what
Brett.
gets me is, go ahead.
Brett, to answer your question, I will repeat what I said before, which was, comes down to what you value as enforcement. They believe they're enforcing our ordinance as written. And they might be. Their way of dealing with animal calls, barking dogs, is different than what we're asking them to do next. And I'm not saying that we are wrong to change that. What I'm saying is we're getting back what we've asked for. We're not asking for enough, and that's why we're here. So this is our opportunity to correct that. I don't have excuses, and luckily I don't have to make the excuses for why they haven't done what they haven't done. But what I'm saying is that it all comes down to communication and clearly stating these are our expectations. If these expectations are not met, then you got your out. I think that's why it's a combination of the two things. It's the ordinance giving the authority, and then it's the animal or the interlocal agreement that says we hereby give you that authority, and we expect you to use it under these terms. And if you don't, we're going to take our funding of that away.
All right, so what you're saying is right now, and I take a pretty wide definition of enforcement, okay? I mean, it not only means citing people or making criminal complaints, it's also knocking on a door and saying you got a warning, or knocking on a door and saying you might want to take care of this problem. And I think that is the sort of kind of, intelligent, proactive policing you like to see either from animal control or the police department. So what you're saying is that basically animal control has realized that enforcement of city ordinances does not mean citing people or trying to cite them and make them pay fines. It's basically knocking on the door and saying, you're in violation of a city ordinance, you need to take care of this problem, in trying to work with them and talk them into complying with the ordinance rather than citing them. And that's what they think
That's what I'm
enforcement
saying.
is
Yes.
at the moment.
Yes.
And
And I
that it's kind of incumbent on us to say that, well, enforcement also means citing people and potentially taking them to district court or making complaints. That basically all these years that they've operated with the idea that enforcement doesn't necessarily mean and may not even should mean citing people. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
Which if you've
All
got
right.
if you've got someone that just doesn't realize what their animal is doing, how it's affecting somebody else, going to their door works beautifully. But if you got the person that could care less what their animal is affecting the other person, then that's when you got a problem, and it has to come to kind of a citation. Andrew, I got another question for you. Explain this to see if I'm reading this right, if I'm interpreting this right or not on the termination. All right, it says termination shall not be effective until the end of the fiscal year in which the notice is given. Okay, so that's like if 6 months from now we say it's not working out, we have to go on, according to how this is written, we have to go on to the end of that year. Okay, the next sentence says if the notice is provided less than 90 days prior to the start of the next fiscal year. So that's if we say, okay, it's not working in April of next year, and we're getting ready to work on the budget. Does it not say the termination shall not be in effect until the end of the next fiscal year, or am I reading that wrong?
Yeah.
So we're stuck in it. This has got to change. You want to sign the rest of it? This termination has got to change. That means we are actually, if we let it go, then we will, and I know how we do, we won't start working on to change the budget until April or May. Well, April or May, we're stuck into the next year of being obligated into it. Even at that point, you've obligated another council into it.
Can I answer that?
You can.
That was not the intent. The 90 days prior to the budget.
I think it was.
That's what it.
No, but that was what was stated at the committee meeting.
But
I just
that's
put
what
into
it-
words what I
that's-
heard at the committee meeting.
That's what it reads, and that's why this cannot pass tonight without going back. We may be on different pages of how to get there, and I think ultimately we want to get there. But you cannot, I mean, this is just wrong to lock us into 2 years is what you're locking us into with this
Well,
agreement.
It's a year,
Yeah,
a year and 3
you're-
months. I mean, at max. But I completely understand what you're saying.
Again,
So let's come up with some new language.
Okay.
the 90 days that we set, in my mind, and I might have misunderstood and I stand corrected, was that if we gave the 90-day notice, like in January or February, right before the county got ready to do their numbers, because they turned theirs in earlier than us, that they would know not to put us in that budget because we were gonna make other arrangements for that fiscal year. That was my understanding
Sure.
for the 90 days.
I think we had that discussion when I was on the interlocal.
You did.
And that was not what they wanted. They wanted 90 days prior to our budget, and it would carry them through the end of just the way it
Sure.
reads. through the
They want
subsequent budget.
protection that they don't get their budget passed, and then 5 days before the start of the fiscal year, we yank the funding.
Well, that's what we want, is protection to make sure our ordinances get enforced.
Sure.
Does it not make sense if you decide you don't get the service and what you're doing, January of that following year after that budget, that you give your 90-day notice and it's the end of March, that you're going to not fund the animal shelter and give them plenty of time before the next county budget that they put together for May? Does that not defund it? That was my impression. Why does
You're
it?
saying
why-
you're saying 90 days, no matter what time in
Yeah,
the calendar.
that gives you 90 days to find some place that hopefully you can find a place to put animals or whatever. That was my intent, that was my understanding, to give 90 days.
Well, that's more comfortable, that is more comfortable than what's written here. Because this locks you into, if you don't do it 90 days before the budget, it locks you into a whole nother year after that. So if 90 days at any point in time that you're saying, okay, we're not getting the service we wanted, 90 days, we're changing the relationship, how we're going to change the relationship, that's a whole lot more comfortable than what's in red on this sheet. What's in red on this sheet locks us in.
I certainly can't see that within 6 months or 9 months, we're not going to know whether this is working or
Well,
not.
here's the thing that I just want to make one more statement, and then I'm going to keep my mouth shut, because you cannot have a relationship and continue communication if you constantly bring up the past. You're not going to be able to go forward. And yes, the past, everybody has made mistakes, previous mayors, previous council people, previous magistrates. But at the end of the day, these past 2 years, we have tried to sit, communicate, and come up with something that we can work with. And that's the whole purpose of that, for us to pass that. We have to give it time to see if it's gonna work before we chop its head off. That's the end of the story.
How about this? I'm just throwing out stuff here. How about 6 months termination without cause, 2 months termination with cause? No matter what time of year it is.
Does 6 month termination mean just because you feel like it?
Yes.
There you go.
And understand ultimately what's going to happen, I think. And it goes back to what you were saying, Karen, and that is, do we want to put in provisions for partial termination and this and that? And if we partially terminate the agreement and they don't like it, well, they're also going to terminate. I think the better way that you have it is you have reasonable terms of out, and then you have a way of renegotiating what you want in a new agreement.
That's all right.
And I think if you're going to terminate for cause, you really ought to be terminating for cause.
I was going
But
to
if
say,
you're
what
gonna-
other reasons should there be?
If you're going to terminate because you like another arrangement, that gives you 6 months to iron out a new deal with provisions for the animal shelter. That's just my
When does that 6 months start? Is it July 1st?
anytime.
Anytime.
Just with written notice, right?
6 months written notice on non-cause terminations, and 2 months written notice on termination for cause.
What are the causes? Is there going to be a list of causes?
You don't usually.
I think you
Well,
just come
you
up with your
could
own
specify
justification.
cause.
Yeah.
Why don't you just, I mean, it's so, gosh, that's vague.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah,
maybe
that's
it's
my
so,
point.
it's
Why
so
would you
huge.
want to have justification when you got 6 months to get out because you want to? You know?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of contemplate that 6 months is the norm, and 2 months is you got something really wrong. Now, we can specify cause if you want to, but if you specify cause, I think you're also
Then you're-
limiting.
And then
yourself.
you eliminate. Yeah.
Well, I think you're restricting yourself.
Yeah.
So, we need to table so this can happen in your office.
I guess, I mean, I don't know if this mayor?
We'll just do it next meeting, but.
Mayor, or I guess another question I have, and you probably don't know this off the top of your head. Of the animals currently residing at the animal shelter, how many are there because pursuant, I guess, to the enforcement of city ordinances? I mean, I know there are a lot of turn-in dogs and
I
turn-in
was
cats.
going to say, I would
unfortunately.
say the majority of them are drop-offs.
Drop-offs, and probably a lot
That
of.
would be my, not knowing the number that you're asking for, that would be my
Probably,
take on the
and
situation.
probably a lot of dogs running loose and the like. But I mean, as far as like barking dogs, nuisance dogs, dogs that chase cars, that sort of thing that they would note on the citation or the complaint or the records. This dog, that was mean of me. This dog is in violation of the city and the city ordinance. Like there's a dog court. I mean, how many of the dogs there are? I mean, that's kind of beggar the question. How many animals there are incarcerated or in the
That were
shelter
picked up by animal,
because of city ordinance, because of the city
Yeah.
enforcement? Can we get some sort of number,
we can ask
like a
for that.
percentage of the animals there that are actually there because
We could
they were
try.
found in violation
We
of
could
city
try,
ordinances?
but I suspect you're not going to get an answer, a good answer,
Okay,
a good,
what-
reliable answer.
Well, I mean,
We'll try.
I mean, a certain amount's going to be turn-ins, a certain amount's going to be with animals running at large, which we already basically say is an issue of state law. I mean, this isn't India. And then we've got but then we've got a certain percentage that I would say that maybe they chased, maybe they bit another dog, maybe they did something like that broke our city
We can
ordinances.
certainly check on that and see if those numbers are available.
Okay.
Okay, Andrew, would you go over the changes that the council wants to make
Yeah, let's.
so that we don't come back and go through this same?
The other question I've got, I'm like Columbo, one more question. Another question I got is this: when you lay out when we talk about the ordinances and the enforcement thereof, if right now the ordinances aren't being cited, if there's not any real enforcement action going on, they're just knocking on doors and saying you might want to comply with the ordinance, how is any dog ending up in the shelter pursuant to the enforcement
Well,
of city
evidently
ordinance?
the ones they're picking up.
Yeah.
I mean,
they're,
how is
they're
any-
going by the ordinance, which they can't enforce.
And as far as impoundment, how is any dog being impounded right now? Okay,
That's a question for animal control.
Yeah.
that's a question. If we can answer it, that'd be great. Thanks.
So, go over the changes that they've discussed, that you're going to correct, put in there and bring it back the next time.
All right. First,
So that
first
we're
point
all
that we
clear.
had was in the services. Somebody had said something about assigning them the primary role amongst the parties. I think that's an easy. I can put that in there. Take out the sheriff.
At request of the county, are you specifying that the judge? When requested by the county? I mean, shouldn't it be the judge requesting that or animal control?
I mean, he's the only one with authority to issue that on behalf of the county.
Yeah, but you could have somebody else call and,
True.
Now, your first bullet point there, I think that was Councilman Singer. Was that in relation to the on-call hours or the calls being answered after hours, or what are we asking there, Mark?
Me? As far as what?
Primary role.
Primary role?
Assigning them the primary role.
I mean, that they would be the first, well, especially as far as dispatch. If there's a barking dog and it gets the 7820 or 911 number, I mean, they get the first dispatch period.
Well, I agree with you. I understand what Brad's getting at. Right now, when dispatch gets a call for animal control between the hours of 8 and 4, it goes animal control. And after that point, they switch dispatch over to the police. Am I incorrect on that, Chief? I think what Brad's asking is, do you want to put in some language regarding that? And I don't know. I mean, the word primary means that it would be in the first instance.
Well, I mean, we're paying $185 a year under this budget to do it for 40 hours. And if that's the true the hour schedule they're working with, to
If
do
you put in-
168 is 777.
Put in any kind of language, then what you're doing is you're asking the county to agree to operating hours. And if that's what you want to ask, that's what you want to ask. But that's
Well, I think what Brad's kind of talking about, and they're talking about the 40-hour thing, is like on the weekend or after hours, if, let's just say, for instance, someone's already been cited, a citation. So the next time they go at the same place, and it could be after hours, that they're gonna impound the dog. That someone on animal control would be on call in case, if they would have to impound the dog, that animal control would be there to do that, because the police officers would not be trained to lasso the dog and try to catch the dog if it was
I
a
think
vicious
it's-
dog.
Then that
I
needs
think
to
it's
be
fair to
written.
put it-
I agree with you.
I think it's fair to put an on-call weekend and nights provision when requested by the police department.
I think that, no, I don't see anything wrong with that. I mean, that would make sense.
I
because-
think that reflects the current agreement anyway.
Right, and the police department don't want to train to lasso dogs. So whoever is that,
Gee,
I know. We call Roy Rogers and Trigger. No. Anyway, I think
Trigger
that's
can't be in the
what
city.
Require lassos for all.
Anyway. What's the next?
Anybody else got anything on
Continue
services?
on.
Knocked out and thank you, Karen, for catching the 50% in the CERS obligation. You had mentioned some language in the ownership of assets, but I mean, honestly, I think that it stays the way it is because it gives us protection. You know, if we want to have some other kind of arrangement, I don't know what that arrangement would be.
We don't own anything.
well, let me ask you then, Amy, because to her point, if the county determines that they're going to build $1 million shelter,
Mhm.
is there anything in here that requires us to participate with that?
It comes down to the budget process. If you approve the budget and the budget has that capital expenditure in it, then you're agreeing to that 50%, unless you otherwise agree in writing. But if you
and
don't agree
see,
to it,
budgets of the past, they have given us just a line item. And I think a couple of years ago, there was a $12,000 horse trailer in there.
You could ask for more.
Well, but we typically don't get that. I mean, we get the, I guess we get the manpower and then like a daily expenses or something like that. But a couple of years ago, we actually had the capital expenditure in there. So unless that's itemized in their budget, we're not gonna know that it's in there or not.
Well, it goes back to the communication process that we had, and they gave us their numbers in the beginning this time. I mean, they have, in good faith, tried to do what they said that they were gonna do. We got those numbers early, and if there were questions at the time, we could have asked them. But what he's saying is that when they give us the numbers and continue to give us the numbers, which I hope they do, that's the whole reason why we've done this, that if there's a big outside number, you can say, find out what that number is, and what are you spending it on? And if it's $500,000 and they're gonna build a building, and their expectation is to give us $250,000 of it, then that would be at the time, you know what, we're not in a position or can do that. We can give you 125.
And I honestly think it comes down to us. If we see a number in there, regardless of how big or small it is, and we don't know what it is, I think it's incumbent upon us to ask.
Yeah.
Well,
I
how
don't
would
think
you,
they're gonna do anything extravagant that's not gonna notify us in advance anyway.
probably not on that, but how can you put something in there about notification, if we're not wanting to take that out or secure that differently, can there be some kind of language in there about any capital notification with separate approval or something like that from the council?
Let me ask you something. When you're saying that, look like you're not gonna know what's going on or not get the hearsay, but you've heard that, and I'm using EMS for specifically, that their ambulances, we've had to borrow one. So we know that eventually we're gonna be having to buy an ambulance. We know that. So don't you think that if they were gonna build an animal shelter, before they ever broke ground, we're gonna know about it? It's not like that they're gonna like try to slip that in on the numbers. You know what I'm saying? It's not like we don't know.
As a matter of clarification, I had no idea that we had to borrow an ambulance.
Well, there you go.
Thank you.
I think that whatever provision we put in there for
I didn't tell you she was in there. I'm sorry.
whatever provision we put in there for approval of budgeted expenses, we ought to expect them to ask the same of us on our run
Exactly.
interlocal. And that
Which
that
doesn't
takes
bother.
away, well, it takes away the city's autonomy. If they're going to expect us to have to get approval on an already budgeted purchase, that's just an extra layer of approval that we got to meet. That's the whole point of the budget process, is you identify what the expenditures are going to be in the budget. And if you're not happy with that expenditure, you don't agree to it being in the budget in the first place. Why would you put it in there and then 6 months down the road when it's time to make that purchase, make them get that approval again?
Right.
That doesn't make any sense to
No,
me.
it doesn't.
All of this is supposed to be in good faith. We're supposed to be getting these interlocal agreements together and signed and got to the Department of Local Government. It's not, they're not written in blood, and they're not written in stone.
But they're legal. It's
They
legal
are
documents.
legal, but they can be changed. Do
It
you
can't-
have a termination in there that you can change it?
You already have very strong language in there that says, no funds shall be spent on operation of the Animal Control Service except pursuant to a lawfully approved operating budget as set forth in this section. Any expenditure made in contravention of this requirement shall be the sole responsibility of the party authorizing the expenditure. And then it goes into the necessity of approving a budget. I don't know how it gets any more strong.
Which section are you?
6.1.
6.1.
They have to have their numbers to us because their budget has to be in before ours. We'll know what their numbers are.
I
Plenty
think
of time to
they're
question.
trying to work in good faith. They're trying to be communicative,
I agree with Connie. We've got to put the past behind us.
move on.
Okay, so how are we gonna do that?
So what's the next one? Well, I understand some of the changes that they're making, and one of the things that Karen pointed out was the money for sure that needs to be, looked at, but, you know, the 90-day termination, without extending it for another 4 years, I mean, make that change. Because that was our intent. And some can probably be changed quicker than others. I think they were trying to make it generalized for all of them, instead of being more specific. Say like if you weren't gonna do the 911 center, and they had to do their own, that would be a big deal. Or, the EMS or whatever. So they were trying to generalize them, like you said, just trying to get something together, put it in writing, and move forward, which is, we hadn't done that till now. So,
I would agree with his suggestion with the 6 month without cause and the 2 month for cause.
Sure.
I think
Well,
that's.
I was trying to get us past 7.1, but
and just be
That's all right.
generalized with it.
we get to that one next. Can we, Karen, are you okay with moving on the ownership of assets? Does the budget language satisfy?
I'm going to read, you continue on, I'm going to read
All right,
6.6
moving
more
on.
again.
I think the only other provision I have is the termination for cause, and I think if everybody's all right with 6 months no cause, 2 months cause, that's what we'll do.
Let's vote on it. Is that what you want? Because we need to know what language to put in this.
That's fine.
6 months for no cause, 2 months with cause. Is that what we're
I
saying?
mean, if the committee, those that are on the committee, feel that is something that's acceptable and doable, then I'm good with that.
That's what we had the committee for, to bring all these suggestions to us. And
That hasn't been the case.
it hasn't been the case. We get over here with the suggestions and we change everything that's in there.
Well, that's because they're suggestions.
We, the committee worked very hard, and I think the county's worked very hard to try to work together, so, and I appreciate what you guys have done, but,
Well,
Here again, not all the committee does is bring back suggestions.
the worst they could do is say no. Let's
Right.
get
Exactly
get
right.
some reasonable requests on there, and let's ask them for them. And if they have objections, they'll tell us what they are.
I don't mind negotiating and going back and talking to them and communicating with them. But for me, I don't want to see the relationship severed because of the
No
things
way.
that we do with the courthouse being here and the city hall being here. It's just like the parking lot that we're doing and the properties that we're doing. We're doing that together. And it's any kind of relationship that you have. You have to communicate and work through it. But I don't think it has to be one-sided. I think there's compromise in anything that we do.
I'm amenable to whatever sort of termination agreement. It's like it's a little bit like negotiating a prenuptial agreement at this point. I mean, you're going into this relationship talking about how the thing might end. I don't
Be
know.
in the paper.
I mean, it kind of is. So
It's a quotable
Writing
quote.
down.
I think that's fine as far as whatever termination. Hopefully, we won't get to that point. But
Well,
All right.
were
do
you
we
on the
have-
committee, Mark?
yeah,
on the
something.
committee.
Yeah.
Well, how locked in, how agreeable were you all to the terminology of the termination, to the dates? Did you all challenge that right there? I mean, was that a big point?
The whole idea of the 90-day before in the fiscal year is basically, I think both sides,
Yeah.
especially the county, but also more me probably as well. Of course, the county has more trouble changing their budget in the middle
Right.
of the fiscal year because you got to get state approval
Right.
to do that. So it's that was the whole idea behind the 15.
So were you okay with it in the budget, in those committee meetings?
Like I said, the termination isn't really a big.
That wasn't a
hang-up
big
for
deal
me.
to you?
But I don't think.
The whole idea of the termination, it's whatever you guys
Yeah,
want.
but I don't think you all, according to what Connie said, I don't think Connie understood, and maybe you all didn't understand as actually how
Oh, no,
how
I-
the termination is written there, that it kind of locks us in if we don't do it in 90 days, and it locks us into if we don't get it done in time, it locks us into the next fiscal year.
I think that's to our benefit. I think we're the ones that are benefiting by being committed to it. And I honestly suspect that if the mayor went to them and said, hey, guys, this just didn't work, and can we get out of this? I bet they'd let us out of it,
Yeah.
in a day.
That's my point.
You know.
But
if
if
things
we're
get really
going-
bad, well, no matter what will happen, we'll terminate it and take it to court. But I don't know if I really want to focus so much on termination. But if we want to do the two months with cause, 6 months without cause, that's fine.
we just need to do something different than how it's currently written. But the bottom line is, we're actually going through one of them, and really the committee has got this process started. We're dissecting it because we want to get it. It is the law. Once it's passed, it is the law that we abide by. It's a contract with the county, so we want it right before we both sign on the dotted line, because look how long it's taken us to even get to this point. So we don't need to do it and just do it and work out the details later. Let's work out the details, even if it takes a couple more weeks, and get it to where we're more comfortable with it, because it's going to be in place for a while. And
I
it's
agree.
legal.
This is, we bring it to you as a resolution because we got it. But you all need to go through and make these. That's why we sent it to you, so you can go through it and say, we don't like this, or let's talk about this. And this has been very productive. We have a list of items that we could vote on. And I'll put them in there, and what we will do is we will send it back over to the county. If they want to have another interlocal committee meeting, we can have one, or maybe they can agree to it as is. But that's the way negotiation process works. The interlocal committee is meant to be a starting point, and get it over to here. We make our changes, and if they're smart, they're talking about it over there as far as the changes that they want. So let's vote on this list. Once again, talking about the primary role, signing on-call nights and weekends for police requests, getting rid of the 50% additional full-time employees.
And the time period
We're gonna do
for
one at a
Termination,
time, or
6
Yeah.
months, no cost.
We need to do one.
Let's do one at a
Want to do
time.
one at a time?
Yep.
All right. One at a time it is.
All right,
Is that really necessary?
Maybe not.
Maybe not. You might can cluster
Why don't we
two of
try
them
it?
together.
Why don't we try it all together first?
Let's do the first page.
Signing the primary role to Animal Control Service and putting a provision that it's on-call nights and weekends when requested by police, scratching out sheriff, adding county judge.
True.
Is that the first page?
Yes.
I agree with that.
is there a show of hands? 1, 2,
You know,
3, 4,
Is
5,
it too late to ask a question on that?
Yes.
All joking aside, really, is it too late?
Yes.
No, it's
I'm
never
gonna
late.
go ahead.
We want to hear your question. I'm dying.
We'll make it
Hear
a
this
prenuptial order. In order to know, we need to know now, and that's a question we've not asked on the on-call. Because if they're not doing on-call at the present time and we add that, then there's going to be an added expense by the on-call.
Like I said, all they can do is say no.
Not if they're paid salary and not hourly.
Do we know
I
that?
don't know that
No,
they're paid
but-
salary,
Your director is.
Yeah.
but the director's not going to be on-call.
Well, the director should be if nobody else can be.
No.
That's a,
Okay.
that's a
But
great,
that is a employee question.
but that's a great point.
Right.
Because what Mark's saying is, to kind of extrapolate it out, if we went on the private market and tried to find somebody to do animal control on the private market, theoretically, I guess there's, private prisons, I guess there's private animal control, boggles the mind. But if we contracted it, we would say, hey, what are your hours? How long are you guys going to be out on call? Are you going to give us 40 hours a week, or are you going to give us 168 hours a week? I think that's a key question. We're spending $185,000
We're
on
gonna
it.
ask them that.
Okay, cool. All right, good.
We're asking them that. Aren't we going over there to present all this to them?
But
Okay.
that's,
We're
that's-
asking-
But we're not asking
We're
details.
proposing that.
You got that straight, Andrew?
I think so.
I think you got 7. Mark wanted a question. I don't know, that first
It's a
page.
good question, Mark.
It wasn't. a question.
No, because if they're not currently doing that, and we're asking them now on a weekend that somebody's got to be available, just say 4 p.m. to midnight. That's just an example. Whether that person goes out or not, they're still on call, and they're probably going to get paid per hour to be on call. So is that price, is that already included in what we're doing, or is that going to be a new expense?
I hear what
Because
you're
that can
asking,
get pretty
and we don't.
expensive if it's not already covered.
They used to have people on call,
get paid.
and then they quit doing it, and went to the 40-hour week.
That's why I say,
So, they don't have anybody, you're saying they don't have anybody on call right now?
I don't know if the director would be on call or not. I would think that she would be if she was called, but I don't think that that's been done for a while, would be my understanding.
We have animal control people driving their cars home at night.
For that
So I
reason.
would assume
If
that they
someone's
would be
on
on
call.
call.
We are proposing to them to have somebody on call. So let's ask them.
well, again, let's be clear now. Let's ask for what we want.
We do.
We want them to be on call 24 hours a day for all calls?
If our police department
Ding.
does not have the ability to lasso a dog and impound a dog, then they have to be on
That's-
call
okay.
24/7.
Well, that's
Right.
that's fine. That's what we're asking for.
And it would be up to the
But
police
that's-
department. If they call, you know they're gonna need them.
That's different than asking them to be on call 24 hours a day to
Exactly.
issue the citation in the first place.
Right.
That's enforcement. Animal control is the police went out there at 3 a.m. and determined, yes, indeed, right now there needs to be an impoundment at 3 a.m.
And they show up.
and they show up.
Absolutely.
That's not the same thing as having dispatch route it to that person's cell phone in the middle of the night. That's what I'm
Right.
trying to get through.
Yeah.
That's the difference in
That makes
on
perfect
call and available to respond to a police request. What I'm saying is I think that is already the working relationship. Now, Chief, you may not be able to speak to it, but I think right now if the police have a situation where they have to make an impoundment in the middle of the night, they get animal control if they need them.
Yeah, but only for a vicious, I would think only for a vicious animal. I think if you're gonna do this, you need to write it specifically in there what you want.
If you go back in there for the second one and you're gonna impound a dog, anytime that the police have to impound a dog, animal control should, when they get called, they should arrive.
But now what he's saying is if it's the second time for a
Citation.
barking dog or whatever,
But
you need them to pick up a barking dog as much as you need them to pick up a dog that's
But do you
not
need
on
him to
fire.
do it at 3 a.m.? That's the question.
That's
Do you
wonderful.
need him to pick up a barking dog when the barking dog, which is not a serious health threat, can wait till the next day during business hours? What Chief,
It
I think, is
depends on
saying
if
is,
it's your neighbor or not.
well, that's
If
true.
your neighbor, they're gonna look at dogs.
Absolutely.
Or-
Hey, we would
I
No, to me, it's a city ordinance. Once we start laying out degrees of violation, I think we're going to be in trouble.
Well, you already okay. I understand that. It's in the police officer's discretion,
Right.
as it will be in the animal control officer's discretion, whether or not it is necessary to impound a barking dog at 3 a.m. And I'm telling you right now that if that same officer can come out the next day during working hours and have a normal working crew come and do it, I think they're going to do it. But if it's this horse is going to die unless we get it into the animal shelter right now, or it has just bitten someone and this is a criminal matter, they're taking that dog right now.
Andrew,
I don't
agree.
know any other way of
How-
specifying it other
How
than
are
to
the
keep it
citizens going to
generic.
react when you tell them, yes, your dog is barking, we know you've been cited twice or 3 times or whatever, but we can't come get it till in the morning?
I would write it so that you give the officer that's on the scene the discretion to impound the dog if he believes it's necessary. If the officer on scene believes it's necessary, you should call the on-duty impound.
And it could be for a variety of reasons.
Yes, for a variety.
I agree.
Police
And I think that's-
discretion.
It's up to me to make
Yeah.
sure we're not
He
impounding dogs.
just said
Sure.
police
And all
discretion.
I planned on putting there was when requested by the police.
Right.
I mean, I
But
think
we
that
need to
leaves it
know
pretty
that when
open.
they request them, they are going to show up. They're not going to say, oh, it's a barking dog.
Understood.
We'll be there in the morning.
Officer discretion. Next.
If we do too much, the county's just gonna say, well, we want out.
Well, you don't, if you do too
The
much, you're
worst they
gonna
can
tie
do is
people's hands.
say no.
You know what I'm saying?
All right. Do we really need to vote on the taking out the 50? We know the 50% is wrong.
Right.
Take that out. There's no need to vote on that.
This is on the retirement.
The only other thing, the only other thing we've got is the termination. 6 months, 2 months. 6 months no cause, 2 months for cause. Ready? Go.
I'm gonna go with the committee's recommendation on that one.
6 months, no call, 2 months with
The
calls.
6 months no calls, 2 month calls, was that in there?
No.
No.
That is
No.
what I, that
That's
is
what
what I
was
It's
just,
gonna have to be added in.
what is in there right now is
To
tied
90
to a
days.
fiscal year, no matter when.
Okay, let me ask you the question. If you got the 90 days in January and you don't extend it a year and you can get out in 90 days, because that's what you wanted, if you give them a 30-day or 90-day written notice, you don't have to have anything. You just, we want out
But is that at any time of the year?
right before the budget year, what it says.
No, I don't like that.
Again, I think the 6 months reflects the reality of what it takes to get another agreement in place for both parties. And if there's a serious problem, then you got your shorter out.
Go ahead and vote.
So the motion is,
No.
6 months,
straw vote is 6.
6 months.
6 months, no calls, 2 months with calls. We have 1, 2, 3, 4.
You're voting for it. I didn't see a majority there.
There was not a majority.
That's what I thought I saw.
Could we repose the
Yeah.
motion like what Connie originally understood this to read, as a 90-day out at any point in time in the year?
90 days, regardless of cause. Just 90 days.
90-day out, but you'd have to strike the language regarding, the start of the fiscal year.
What was
yeah.
the committee's recommendation again, though?
The
90
reason why
days
we did
prior
that-
to the budget.
Someone on committee brought it up that they thought that was what I wrote was the understanding that we had hashed out in prior committee meetings. That may or may not be the case, but that's what we voted on.
The 90 days.
No, it was 90 days, and it was tied to a fiscal year. If you got to give 90 days notice and everything has to be tied to a fiscal year, then the only logical result to that is that if you give it less than 90 days, there's something else.
Here's my thought on it, when I was thinking, going through this process, is that when we pass the budget, let's just take this year. We passed the budget this year just the way that it is for the budget. And we're waiting for them to do and enforce, and, we get into December and we're monitoring it and all of that kind of stuff, and at the end of December, we figure out, you know what, it's not working. They're not doing what they said they were gonna do. So when January rolls around, we give them their 90-day notice because they're getting ready to do their budget in March, and April and May, to present it in May. They know we're not gonna be a part of that budget because we're gonna make other plans. Does that make sense?
It makes
does.
perfect sense, but what if we don't make that determination until April? Maybe for the first 3 or 4 months, we don't have those, because these complaints are cyclical. We don't have these complaints all the time, but maybe for the first 3 or 4 months, everything's fine. We don't hear anything, and then all of a sudden, in a 6-week period of time, we realize that the ordinances are not being enforced. Then we're locked in for for the entire next fiscal year.
Don't you think that that gives you an opportunity for communication when they're not doing it?
I think we would communicate with them, period. We're not going gun from the hip to terminate the agreement. I think there's going to be an amount of communication anyway.
Right. Well, that's my understanding, and,
Meaning, with your example, this wasn't clear to me, that if you
Okay.
gave a 90-day notice on January 1, then funding stops on April 1.
when we go to do our budget,
No. What is 90 days for?
I think that's what she's
the
saying.
90 days is that you're giving them 90-day notice to let them know for the next fiscal year, you're not gonna be a part of that animal shelter. You're gonna do your own thing.
And that doesn't mean, that has no meaning. 90 days has no meaning. If you give them, if you call it 90 days and give them January.
That's what's in there right now.
Yeah, if you give them January 1 notice, 90 days doesn't mean anything. We're still funding it through June 30th.
90 days is giving us an opportunity to find out what we're gonna do to fund something else before our fiscal year. That was my thought when we were doing the 90 days.
What's in there right now is, regardless of when you terminate, it doesn't become effective until the end of that fiscal year. And if you terminate less than 90 days before the end of the fiscal year, the termination doesn't become effective until the end of the next year. I agree, that's not very good terms.
Nope.
That's what I was asked to put in there. That's why I put it in there.
Andrew, what's common in other agreements?
I don't think you see this level of
Well,
nitpickery.
I'll tell you where these terms came from. These terms came
That's a
from.
good one. Quote that.
Yeah, you're free to use that.
These terms.
It's a gift.
These terms came from discussions about the EMS departments, where these terms came from. And that came from my first year in here, because they wanted to be protected, and we wanted to be protected if the case should arise that we chose to go with fire-based EMS. That's where these terms came from. And the facilitator that we had at that time carried those terms through pretty much all the interlocal agreements that we discussed during those series of meetings.
That's true.
What we have had is every time another interlocal has come up, we have changed our mind on what the termination provision should be based on how we feel about that particular interlocal.
Do you think 6 months across the board would be reasonable?
No cause?
You know, I don't know. I thought that was in maybe another agreement that
I think it is.
passed.
I think in other agreements we've had a flat 90-day termination provision. I do believe on the less controversial ones you got 90 days to get out. I think on the Revenue Commission one we said we know that it's not practical to sever ties in the middle of a year, and we just said we'll just make it make it tied to the fiscal year, no matter what.
I guess let me ask this question, because I'm thinking from our side from a defensive. What if they came to us and said, hey, this relationship just isn't working apparently. We did something else and they want to sever ties. The dynamics of the fiscal court has changed. I think 6 months would give us some level of time and protection in order to figure out what we're going to do. And I guess I'm asking you all that. Would 6 months not be a reasonable amount of time just across the board?
I mean, they could give us 6 months.
Essentially.
Works both
Right.
ways.
Works both ways.
Both ways.
Well, that's better to have the 6 months, even as you're playing the budget, because where it drops in January with the 90 days, it doesn't really work well when the mayor's planning the budget or the city council is working on the budget. But if you had 6 months, then even if you had to fund it for half a year, that's what's going into the budget, and then that gives you time to work on it. So that's better than how it's written
Or
currently.
maybe even salvage the relationship, If it's okay with everybody, why don't we at least take a straw
What we have
vote?
on the table is a 6-month termination provision, regardless of the reason, regardless of the time.
And there was cause or no cause?
That is regardless of the
Regardless,
reason,
okay.
regardless
Either
of the time. I
Just
think
that's
we're
the-
seeing
See a show of
1,
hands?
2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
6, 7.
7, 8 hands.
Okay.
All right,
Oh, wow, we've got, oh, man.
makes it easy. Don't think you'll have any trouble with that whatsoever.
I feel like smoking a cigarette.
Okay.
Now,
do we,
on to the ordinance. Is that what's next?
yes.
Oh, yeah.
But are we not tied in one with the other?
I'm
No.
glad we're done with animal control tonight. What's next?
No, the ordinance
You want to skip to A?
stands on its own.
Oh, no.
Do we want to have a first reading? We know we have to have, here's the thing, we know we got to have these changes. And there's nothing in here about animal
Well,
control.
let's have the first reading and get it over with,
There's nothing in here about the animal control department.
Tracy.
Well, I did have one question. I mean, there is one big
Please.
thing. It says on any persons violating any provision of this chapter shall be deemed guilty of a violation and shall be punished by a fine of not less than $25, but no more than $250 for the first offense.
Yes.
But for the second and subsequent offenses, a fine of not less than $25, but no more than $500, and/or confinement in the local detention center for not more than 90 days shall be imposed.
That's essentially a misdemeanor.
I mean, I don't know if we need to put jail time in here.
You don't, it's in the court's discretion whether to give jail time. And the court would really, first off, they're going to say, why are you here, Mr. Williams? Why are you here on this? And it seems highly unlikely that you would get court. But what that does is you need to tie it to a set penalty. And I think that's what Glenn did. He said first violation is a violation. It's not something that, it's like a speeding ticket. Second violation is It's like speeding 30 miles an hour over the speed limits. It's a problem.
Is this tied to a particular person? Like if you've got one dog and you violate it with the dog? Okay. If you have one dog, if you have a dog and you violate the ordinance somehow with that dog, and then maybe you've got another dog or a cat, would it count? Would those be two separate counts that would count against the person? Why? I mean, would that be first and second against that person? How's it tied?
It could be.
I don't know. I've got to strike the jail time out. I mean, is there any way to strike the jail time out and keep it?
Not if the judge's call.
Well, no, I mean, but I would strike it out in the ordinance.
You could strike the jail time.
Okay. Yeah, let's do that.
If somebody doesn't pay, doesn't this work like, it's like he says striking the jail time out of it, but doesn't it still work if the police give 20 ends up giving this person 20 citations? Can't they do the same as giving 20 parking tickets and I guess they have, if they pay the 20 citations, it doesn't matter, but.
Well, here's something we haven't really discussed.
Well, this is a great time to bring it up.
We're all on a roll.
You gotta understand, and Chief, please speak up anytime you feel like it's necessary. These are not parking tickets. These are not speeding tickets. These are not prepayable citations. There is no authority to do so. You only have authority for prepayable when you have so in the law.
What's prepayable?
Prepayable means you get a ticket and you don't want to get hauled in front of a judge, so you mail in your $200 payment.
Right.
This means you get cited to this, and you're getting hauled in front of the judge. So it's sort of a big stick kind of thing. Look, shut your dog up, or I'm going to give you this citation, and you will have no choice but to appear in front of a judge and be cited for this. And if you don't, there'll be a warrant issued for your arrest. So, I'll admit, that's not initially what I was thinking. I was thinking we could get something along the lines of a parking ticket, and you can't.
Can you do levels of that? Like
That's what we done.
that's because I haven't studied
That's
this as
essentially
I
what
was
we've done.
that
Is we
one.
said, look, the first time it's a violation, you're going to come before the judge, and it's going to be a judge. I'm sorry. Here's my $100 and my $75 court costs, or $150 or whatever it is. That's the real pain is in the court cost. And the second time, it's going to be a bigger cost, and the judge is going to say, I just saw you, Mr. Hartley, in here 2 months ago on this issue. You're going to do community service for 6 months as a result of this. Or, this is my third time in there, and it's an egregious violation. You're going to do a week in the poke.
Okay, what about the first time Sassy's misbehaving and she's barking at all the neighbors and they're sick and tired of it, and you come to my door and say, you really need to do something with your dog? Am I going to get cited immediately then, or am I going to get that as a warning, and then the next time they come back, then we start?
You are going to get it's in the officer's discretion, but if it's not an egregious violation, you're not going to get.
But it might be in their discretion that they really didn't like me the whole neighborhood didn't like me on the street, so.
Yeah, but every citation that's written has that same language, right?
Okay.
That's how all state laws are.
Okay.
But is
Don't
the
want
warning,
to ever mess with officer discretion.
but is the warning documented as well, so that if you know that you're called back, then you get that citation, you had a warning, now you got a citation, okay.
Oh, it is in the CAD
It's in
system.
the CAD system, put it in the CAD system for warning issue.
Okay, so the warning's in there. So you come to the house and you warn me, and so
About
that's in
Sassy.
there. So you'll know the next time you come
Mhm.
that
you
you're
will.
there.
You better hush Sassy up.
It's his dog, not mine.
I got two dogs. I got.
All right, what are we going to do with this thing?
That's funny right there.
Well, we can have the first reading, can't we?
Yes, we can.
And get it over with?
Love to have it.
Would that be the
Any
recommendation?
other questions before we have a first reading?
Probably. I haven't read it real well.
Read.
You want to read
Don't
the?
you
You're going
amend
to read the
con-
summary.
Don't you amend ordinances? We've amended them many
Oh,
times.
Yeah.
All night you were that, weren't you?
Yeah.
Come on.
An ordinance amending Chapter 3 of the Georgetown Code of Ordinances related
Doing
to
it now.
animals. Summary. Section 1 amends Section 3-24 of the Code of Ordinances to repeal the provisions of licensing of dogs and cats. Section 2 amends Section 3.27 of the Code of Ordinances to change the procedures and requirements for impoundment of animals and livestock pursuant to the chapter. Removes the authority to issue civil penalties. Section 3 amends Section 3-33 of the Code of Ordinances to specify that officers authorized to enforce the provisions of the chapter. Removes the authority to issue civil penalties. Section 4 amends Section 3-34 of the Code of Ordinances to remove the authority to issue civil penalties, modifies the criminal penalties provision. Section 5 provides that if any portion of this ordinance is for any reason held invalid or unlawful, such portion shall be deemed a separate provision, and such holding shall not affect the validity of the remaining portions of this ordinance. Section 6 provides that this ordinance shall become effective upon adoption and publication. The full text of this ordinance is available for examination in the City Clerk's Office, 100 North 4th Street, Georgetown, Kentucky, 40324, at www.georgetown.gov. Introduced in public read for the first time June 16, 2015.
Good one.
All right. Let's move on, please.
Andrew?
Yeah.
How will the payments on the citations be handled?
What do you mean?
Will they go through the court system, or will they come through here?
They have to go through the court system.
Okay.
Budget amendment.
This is, I'll go over highlights very quickly. The main reason for this budget amendment is to bring in the funding for the purchase of the properties. So $100,000 additional property taxes, $450,000 additional net profits, which was a lump sum payment that we received from Toyota, $243,625 intergovernmental revenues to pay for half of the purchase of the land, $488,250 for the land purchase, and up to $1,000 closing costs. That's the majority of that. The remainder of those funds that will be used for the demolition and the parking lot design and construction will bring into next year's budget via amendment, because obviously we won't begin that project until after July 1. There's a small correction on dispatch. We had brought in $25,000 of additional one-time revenues and expenses. That is a 50-50 with the county, and I had not accounted for that. It's a wash on the budget, 50% of that in expenses, 50% of that in revenues. Bringing in the $5,000 for the fireworks that we had approved. There are some line items that are going to exceed the budget. Workers' comp, we had an audit, we got a bill that caused the budget to go over. That's one of those, some years you get money back, some years you get an audit, and due to your claims and risk and payroll, you get a bill at the end. The insurance claims and deductibles, that's wrecks. We have $1,000 deductible per vehicle wreck and just different things. So that's accounting for some of those. Obviously, we've had some that have had police car totaled out, so that was something we had to take care of. A lot of that also, especially sometimes has to do with KLC handles a lot of our past litigation, and we get bills from him as they complete cases that can be 2 or 3 years old. Those are extra insurance bills that we get to pay those deductibles and any co-insurance. So we get those throughout the year. They're unplanned. As was brought up during the budget discussion, the Public Works motor fuel, entering over budget, their expendable supplies. There were some medical and hospital in a couple of departments. Someone must have had a change in their dependents type of plan that they had, because what we had in the budget is not, this is more than just the 3% vacancy rate in this department. This is due to someone making a change in that. This one was just an error on the electrical inspection. There are 2 different revenue accounts in the system, and we had put $50,000 in both of those when it should have only been one, so I apologize for that. Eliminating the transfer to business park fund, you'll see later on, we had a sale of $95,000. That pays for the debt, so general fund does not need to give business park $63,000. The recycling fund, there were 2 line items running over budget there, the professional services and the motor fuel, and straightening out the difference between the intergovernmental revenue and the sanitation prior year revenue that we use to balance that fund, because it should be a 50-50 split. Landfill fund, there were some professional services that we needed to, we reduced professional services landfill operating because of the state bills that were more than expected this year. Hopefully we'll be getting one of those off the books here very shortly on that. And also we had to buy back, if you recall, we had to buy back some property that someone had purchased at auction. We hadn't actually put that in the budget, so that was in the landfill fund. Drug forfeiture, they had plenty of revenue to cover their expenses.
it's always an estimate at the beginning of the year because you don't know how much you're gonna get, so line those out, and again, the business park, bringing in the sale of property and relieving the general fund of its obligation. We'll let her have a first reading if there's no other questions.
An ordinance amending the annual budget ordinance for fiscal year July 1, 2013 through June 30th, 2014. Summary, general fund, property taxes are increased by $100,000. Occupational license fees, net profits are increased by $450,000. Electrical permit revenue is decreased by $50,000. Intergovernmental revenues are increased by $260,063. General government expenditures are increased by $21,131. Police department expenditures are increased by $29,525. Public works expenditures are increased by $30,050. City council expenditures are increased by $14,000. City clerk expenditures are increased by $8,600. Building inspection expenditures are increased by $7,000. Community services expenditures are increased by $12,938. Transfers to other funds are decreased by $63,000. Recycling fund. Prior year revenues are increased by $31,663. Intergovernmental revenues are decreased by $10,663. Recycling expenditures are increased by $21,000. Landfill. Prior year revenues are increased by $2,994. Landfill expenditures are increased by $17,794. Drug forfeiture fund. State revenues are increased by $39,880. Expenditures are increased by $25,000. Business park fund. Revenues from sale of property are increased by $95,895. Transfers from other funds are decreased by $63,000. All ordinances or parts of ordinances in conflict with this ordinance are hereby repealed. This ordinance shall take effect after its passage and publication according to law. Full text of this ordinance is available for examination in the City Clerk's Office, 100 North Court Street, Georgetown, Kentucky, 40324. Publicly introduced and read for the first time June 13, 2014.
Okay, first reading.
Was there not, within these budget lines, was there not room within the individual budget lines? Our level of control on council is just, the various departments and then the individual interlocal agreement, community services. Was there not room within the budgets?
The departments have up to $10,000 that they're allowed to move line to line without your approval.
Okay.
That's if that money is already in another account that they can take from. So anything over 10,000 automatically requires your approval.
Okay.
But some of these others, no, there wasn't sufficient because they were larger amounts.
Okay.
So,
all right. Thanks.
we did look at that first. So we went through that whole process last month, going through line by line. A few of these were some of those items left over that there just wasn't enough to cover all those line by line.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. We'll kind of take 6 and 7 in one swoop here, but just to note, the only difference between the ordinance kind of sponsored by council members Thompson, Tackett, and Lusby last week that incorporated the changes, and the one that I drafted at the request of council members McEwen and Penn is in the sanitation fund, and between the sanitation and recycling funds. The original ordinance that we discussed last week had the $250,000 for the purchase of garbage trucks, $50,000 for Rosie's. The second version of the ordinance has removed both of those items and put them in a contingency account in the sanitation fund. And just a reminder about that, even though we, and I've spoken with Councilmembers McEwen and Penn, that even though we reduced those items, since they are funded by sanitation fees, regardless of what is done with those funds have to stay in the sanitation fund to be used for those purposes because of their service fees generated by our citizens. So I was wondering if we want to take a hand vote to see which one we want to read.
I wanted to ask why.
I'll come. I went in Friday morning and talked with Stacy specifically about putting those two items on hold, just as I had talked about at the previous meetings. Both of those items, the automated truck and the Rosies, and absolutely I'm for recycling and for improving our sanitation efficiency. But I feel like we need more time either for Andrew and ourselves to work out what the plan is for the additional expenses. Before I just don't want to make $300,000 worth of purchases just to see what we're going to do with it, right? the automated truck, the intent of it is to go along with improving citizen participation with the Herbies. The Rosies as well would do that with curbside recycling. But if we don't have an idea of how we're going to do it, or what we're going to do, or what the plan is, I don't want to support spending $300,000 for either of those.
I'll make one comment, just to make sure, whichever version we go with, just remember council approves all purchases over 10,000, so even if something is bid, everything will be. But obviously.
I think there's also some logic, though, to having a new director have input in those decisions as well. You know, a new director may see other value in traveling down different roads to get the same job done, and I think if we're going to make a $300,000 investment and slap on a lot more responsibility on our sanitation department, that they need to have input in that.
I would kind of split the middle. I would agree with Mr. McHugh and Mr. Penn as far as taking out the automated truck. The only pause I have as far as taking out the $50,000 for the recycling program is I don't think we earmarked that specifically to buy Rosie's. I think it was $50,000 to put it in the budget, say, okay, this is going to be for curbside recycling, and somewhere down in the fiscal year try to figure out exactly how we're going to carry that program forward. I mean, I think it's the first real black and white. We put it on a piece of paper. This is what we resolved to do as far as going forward and trying to at least start some sort of curbside recycling program in whatever form. So I'd want to keep that in the budget. As far as the automated truck, I mean, we've got this list of all the problems within the sanitation department, Mayor, as far as these trucks. And rather than spending $250,000 on a new automated truck, maybe we should earmark that $250,000 toward maintenance of our current trucks, as far as trying to figure out what's wrong with them and also try to fix them up some.
Mark, let me clarify, as Stacy mentioned, the $250,000 and the $50,000 are still within the sanitation's budget.
That's right.
A contingency fund, but they aren't allocated specifically for those purchases. So they're in there, and as you mentioned, I mean, there's not, we haven't been able to specify what we're going to do with a neighborhood test run curbside or something. We can do that once we have more input. So I think that's in there to answer your question.
Okay.
And we could, if we decided 6 months down the road to go on with the recycling program, or 4 months or 3 or whatever, we could still use that contingency fund for those purchases.
Either version of this budget, a budget
would cover both of them.
At any point to redirect these however you like. We decide we need 2 rear loaders instead of an automated truck, you know, that can be spent that way, or it can be either version of the budget.
It's really not much what they're asking and what we've got. It's really not much difference in it. Only thing on the question on the recycling, let's say we don't get to recycling this year or something. So can $10,000 without putting it, like they're saying, in a kind of a contingency, can $10,000 of that be taken out of that line item to use for something else without the council's approval? And
not
recycle.
in the contingency. I mean, that's the thing. We would have to bring that back.
But if it's in the regular budget, could it be taken out if you need something else in sanitation, $10,000, and you had that line item, but we hadn't used it? Could $10,000 be taken out of that too?
I'll have to go back and look at our budget amendment ordinance and see if it says anything specific about capital expenditures. I don't think it does. Versus anything under 10,000 line item. I'll look at the budget ordinance. I won't say it couldn't.
Because that would be the reason of kind of supporting what they're saying is, I think if it's going to be a truck or something, it's a little different. But for what you're talking about for the recycling, that doesn't take it away, but it makes it holds that money so that you can't go in there and shift out.
And please keep in mind too that I ultimately, if it is an approval less than 10,000, the mayor and I ultimately have the approval of that. They're not. Able. But what I'm saying is,
I'm aware of that.
No, but what I'm saying is, if it's council's wish that we don't touch that 50,000 until we decide how to spend it, then we will not allow them to move that.
I mean, does that have to be done the way they're doing it, or can that be done separately?
It can be left in the line item it's in the first version, and if you all choose to not buy Rosie's this year, then that account would not be touched.
Right.
I mean,
but
anyway,
if we leave it in your version, they can buy them on July 1.
Well, they probably bid it out.
Bid it, not buy them,
Could
but
you
start the process.
I mean,
Yeah, you could start the process, but you couldn't allocate the money. Because I know what the mayor and what the finance director can do, how you shift money. That would be my concern is there's $50,000 in there, but something needed in sanitation that was $9,000, and you could
That's
shift it out of that. So if
And
there
we
could be
talked about
protection
that.
that couldn't be moved, then that would be,
Yeah.
that would be fine.
We
I don't
talked
mind
about
that they
that.
go
I
check
hope you would
quotes.
trust me enough to know that if I know there's an account you don't want touched, I won't touch it.
Who's we? Is we the?
And the
Stacy
department
and I,
may not.
Kelly, we talked about that Friday
8 of
morning,
us together
just
would
as
say
an
that.
option.
Just a minute, Mark.
No, I don't have any problem with what Kelly or Brad are trying to propose. I guess the only thing I wanted to come back is, I know we gotta decide on which first reading we're going to have. But I would like to pose a question to the entire council. And Mayor, you, Andrew, Mr. Singer, Mrs. Tackett, and I sit in a joint, or an interlocal meeting in this chamber, I think back in late April. And there's going to be a pretty significant expense very soon with the EMS, with the cost of new defibrillators and also the cots for the ambulances. And the county volunteered. We did not ask. The county volunteered to bill us over 2 years for the cost of those defibrillators and also cots. Again, they volunteer based, and again, I'm not going to try to put words in their mouth, but it was based on our financial situation, trying to help us. In the meantime, we have agreed to purchase property behind this building. We were not charged the rent for the electrical inspection for 1 year. And I guess my question is, and I'll even go one step further, in our last council meeting, we took 2 different straw votes. One to agree to go ahead and put 2 police officers in the budget that we would vote on later down the road, to whether or not we're going to fund. And then we also, for our Main Street program, we initially, and I missed the budget meeting where we were going to reduce that budget, but then last meeting we agreed to restore the money back to what was asked for. So I guess what I would like to do tonight, Mayor, I don't want to speak for you. I would just ask that, we've taken straw votes tonight. We took straw votes last week. I think as a show of good faith back to our partners across the street, that we need to take a straw vote on whether or not we're going to pay the bill that we owe the county one time instead of over 2 years. And again, I don't want to speak for you, but I would ask that, can we take a straw vote on that?
You understand what he's asking?
What's the,
Maybe.
What
what's
was the
the
dollar amount to?
Yeah, what's the additional?
225,000, wasn't it, our part? Is that what it was?
We were basically paying $112,000 and
500, yeah,
each year.
Each year.
for 2 years.
It was a $450,000 total
Right.
expense. Our half was $225, $112, $500.
Do we have $112,000 to pay it off?
Currently have $43,720 is the balance in the general fund.
The way the budget sits
The
right
way the
now?
budget was adjusted. I guess.
Actually, I think I'm the one that brought it up to see if they would be willing to divide it over 2 years, and they said that, there didn't seem to be a problem of doing that. And the rental for the electrical office, is that still in the budget? Because they had in the past paid that without us, and I think they made a comment that if we were to bring that up, question that was not supposed to be in the original documents that came to us. But they would take that out because
My
we had.
understanding from the interlocal, we did discuss that, was that they gave us the first year off, so to speak, from paying that when they had to go to the new facility. But and maybe they failed to put it in last year's, but it was supposed to be in after that first year. And the $18,000 is in the sheriff
put it
costs
in.
for the electrical.
I think that the
We
splitting
did discuss that in interlocal committee, I do believe.
the splitting the payment for the defibrillators, the way I kind of perceived that was in lieu of us not being on a regular rotation on the capital expenditures. Just like we cycle police cars in, 4 or 5 at a time. If we decided to go in and replace our entire fleet at one time, that's a significant investment. So while I appreciated that, I don't think we can find the money to do that right now. But B, I also think that that from a replacement standpoint, I would like to have seen some graduation into that huge expenditure rather than all of it at one pop.
And we discussed that. We discussed that very item, and it can't, the way it was explained to us is that could not be done. And please, somebody that was there, correct me if I misunderstood that.
Yeah, it's all, the issue is, I mean, it's not an issue where there's any blame. It's just, maybe this wasn't, maybe, you know, it would have been nice maybe to have lead up to this in this year, but I mean, that's not realistic. Basically, the defibrillators, you want to have them all on the same model year in terms of ease of use, in terms of overall safety, in terms of battery life, those sorts of things. So that's the reason they wanted to buy all the defibrillators at once. And, you know, they offered to let us pay it over 2 years, and I don't see any reason why not to pay it over 2 years. We don't have the money to pay the whole thing now, so if they've offered, we'll take them up on it.
I'm just going to ask this question, Stacy. I mean, we've got money in our bank account. I mean, we could transfer money from a bank account. Then we're using some of our reserves to fund the budget, which is something we've had to do in years past. I guess I would also ask you this question as it relates to property taxes. What increase are we anticipating this year? I know we just amended the budget. Was it $100,000?
Well, I amended the budget to what we'd actually collect. We had budgeted for 1.4 million, and we collected about 1.5 and 8,000.
And what do we have in the budget?
I put in 1.5, which is pretty much what we collected this year. Now you could potentially go up, but.
I mean, I know the PVA, they're making adjustments on commercial properties, and I just got a feeling that that's going to be a pretty sizable increase for the city. I mean, that would be an area that we could make an adjustment on.
And, you know, we could always do that with an amendment in July. I mean, I'm going to have to bring in the project for the parking lot anyway. We didn't bring that into the new budget.
So how would you suggest that you handle Mr. Showalter's request?
Well, we obviously, you know, we have a little extra cushion in the budget if something comes up, if there's an emergency. I guess I always like to have a little excess. Right now, we have $43,000 left with the changes that were made by council over the last couple of meetings. It's not a huge cushion. If we potentially adjust, I always try to be conservative on revenues. I can certainly contact the PBA and if that's council's wish.
Well,
But
let me ask this question. Should we just take an opinion, and if that's something that we want to do? I mean, if it's not something we want to do, then there's no sense putting her through the exercise to try to figure it out.
Well, you could take at least.
That's what he's asking.
You could at least do if you wanted to do a partial of it and go ahead and do the 43, add the 43 to the county's payment. I mean, now that makes our obligation to them next year a little bit less. But
Well, if before the fiscal year ends up, if we come financially a little better than what we anticipate, and it's very possible, you know, you might have some funds come in. We could always, as a council, decide that we're going to pay that debt if we have the funds.
yeah, we could pay it in full at any point.
You know what I'm saying, Mark?
We potentially could be getting another net profits check in July,
Right.
and that would be unbudgeted funds that I was not planning on going into reserve.
Okay, let's see a show of hands. The county has offered us the opportunity to pay for the defibrillators over 2 years. Do you want to accept that? Let me see a show of hands, or do you want to pay for it all in one lump sum?
Which one? We're gonna do the first one?
First one, I mean, you want to
Pay over 2 years?
keep it as it is?
The agreement we have right now, 2 years.
We can address this.
Accept
and
what
get
they
it
offer.
money ahead.
Yeah.
Here we go,
The first vote, that was to leave it as is?
As is, yeah.
as is.
But with
Unless is there some extenuating reason that we need to reconsider that, Mark? I mean, I guess I'm trying to
As far as what
understand.
now? Why should we pay it? Why should we
Yeah,
pay it
is
over
there-
1 year instead of 2 years?
Yeah.
I think as a show of good faith for what we've done, you know, we found we took a straw vote, and it didn't get
Well,
the
no,
support.
I'm just asking if
Yes,
there's something
my
outside
concern
of
is that we found the money to purchase the property, which was a joint effort. The county participated. They didn't have to. They did. You know, not asking to pay the the electrical inspection rent. I'm just saying that, you know, that's, even though that's not a large amount of money, it's money that we didn't have to pay as a body. back to the county for that rent. And I just think as a show of good faith, if we have found money in our budget to pay, to reinstate the other two items that I mentioned that we voted on at our last meeting, then, my line of thinking, which is different from others, that's fine, is that we should pay. If we've got the money to do that, then we've got the money to pay this over 1 year instead of 2 years.
What is our total share of the defibrillators?
$225.
Okay, their budget for 2014 was 1.653 million, and what we've adopted or will adopt is 1.957. So that's a lot more than $225,000.
Well, I have to go back and look at their budget, and compare line by line, I can't remember off the top of my head. But
And we're only supposed to pay half of that, so it should be $113,000.
450 total cost for it, wasn't it?
Total.
Right, 450. So 100 and a quarter is what should be in our budget this year.
This year, and
112.50.
pay for it for our other half next year.
Okay.
I'd have to pull it right, I didn't bring my whole document with me tonight.
You voted on what you want to do.
Right.
Let's move on, please.
Well, I have a question. Well, let's get back to the contingency thing, because we're talking about doing budget 1 or budget 2. Then I just want to get a clear understanding. When you talk about doing the contingency fund, it's still going to be in the sanitation.
Has to be.
Right. And it'll be spent within sanitation. It just will not be designated or earmarked for a truck or the
Yes.
50,000 for recycling.
Until you all have made a decision.
Let me ask you this.
Those funds.
What if we, now, I implicitly trust you, and I know you wouldn't, if we directed you not to spend the money that we're directing toward recycling, on $50,000, I know you would, but would it be better is to set up maybe a separate fund and call it curbside recycling fund and earmark $50,000 into that fund within the environmental services group?
I mean, essentially,
And that would give us a level of control over that.
It is in the recycling. And right now, the $50,000 is in the recycling department. I put it under the account called Rosie's. Obviously, if it needs to be spent on something other than that, I put it there because the initial discussion I thought was the main startup cost to doing curbside was purchasing the Rosie's.
Right.
So it's in a line item under the recycling department called Rosie's. That's where it's at in version 1 of this budget.
Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Well, I guess my question would be with Public Works and having an interim director and looking for a new director in the process, would they not be in the process of like looking at what needs to be taken care of, what needs to be done,
Yeah,
and
we've
that kind
already
of thing?
had some
It'd be
discussions in the 2.5 days that have already been taking place about what
Right.
needs to be done.
right, and that's what they're focusing on. So they're not going to be focusing on recycling right now.
The number one priorities, of course, are safety and of the vehicles.
So
and
whether this
looking at
money,
processes for sanitation.
this 300,000, whether it's in sanitation the way it is in budget number 1, or whether you put it in a contingency fund in budget number 2, would that money be available if we needed to make
Yes,
repairs and things like that they would need?
we could do a budget amendment to divert it to whatever purchases we need to make.
Can't,
Well, in either version of the budget, we
Yeah.
can do a
In
budget
either
amendment to divert it to whichever.
can't speak for Linda or the mayor, but we've got to come back to you all regardless of what we do.
That's what I thought.
We're gonna have to come back for a budget amendment no matter what.
I agreed at the last meeting, I guess, to co-sponsor the, I guess the second one, but when Kelly sent out the requested email, I don't personally have any problem taking the 300,000 now, because I know that the money is still gonna be somewhere, it's still gonna be available, right, and that's a decision that we can come back and make later. And I say this every budget time, there's always things in this budget that I'd like to either take out or put in, and I'm sure each one of us feel the same way, but at some point we gotta come to terms, get the budget approved and passed, and then we can address the issues as we each see fit. So
I don't have a big problem with what they want to do versus the other one either. It's
They're the same thing. They're really the same thing. They're not no difference hardly in them.
you know, I kinda like the idea of it not being in
The
there, really.
only true difference departmentally is taking the 50,000 out of recycling and putting it back in sanitation until
Right.
a decision is made. So it's versus having 250 in sanitation and 50,000 in recycling versus the whole 300,000 in sanitation.
I'm with Kelly on that. I mean, I think we've got to get some direction. I think we've got some fundamental things that we've got to get resolved first, and before we can start looking at the expanding recycling.
Yeah,
We will,
definitely now.
we give you the commitment that we will come back with that plan as soon as humanly possible. I think right now we're stuck in budget mode, and we can get through that, and we can immediately start working on that plan.
Oh, well, and keep in mind, Linda's obviously not in budget mode with the rest of us. She is already working furiously to address those issues, so.
Okay,
Here's what needs to be done.
What I'm hearing is budget number 2. How many, since it's inclusive of everything, who's in favor of going with budget number 2?
It's fine.
That's fine.
4.
That's fine.
Okay,
We just need to get our budget.
let's
passed.
go with number 2 then.
Thank you.
Sponsored by.
Yeah, sure.
Is this one. The more in the sanitation or what? It's this one, 307.
Yes.
No. 1,758. This one,
More in sanitation.
oh, well. Yes.
Some of you-
True, it would.
That is true. Why don't we do that? Okay.
Do it.
Go ahead.
An ordinance of the City of Georgetown, Kentucky, adopting the annual budget for the fiscal period July 1, 2014 through June 30th, 2015 by estimating revenues and resources and appropriating funds for the operation of city government. Summary, Section 1. Adopts by incorporated exhibit the fiscal year 2014-2015 budget of the City of Georgetown, Kentucky as follows. Governmental funds. Prior year revenues, $1,509,925. Revenues, municipal taxation, $2,051,000. Licenses and permits, $16,094,702. Fines and forfeitures, $65,000. Intergovernmental revenues, $4,241,720. Charges for services, $130,775. Other revenue, $22,500. Other financing sources transfers, $5,692,912. Total city revenues, $29,808,534. Expenditures, general government, $1,192,910. City council, $150,774. City clerk, $208,685. Police, $5,140,977. Public Works, $1,905,044. Fire, $4,713,263. Code enforcement, $65,337. Building inspection, $367,026. Dispatch telecommunications, $1,307,012. Utilities, $474,000. Community services, $4,223,572. Capital outlay, $8,280,562. Debt service, $1,202,275. Transfer to other funds, $533,376. Total city expenditures, $29,764,813. Proprietary funds. Prior year revenues, $659,435. Revenues. Sanitation, $1,815,000. Recycling, $150,798. Landfill, $136,000. Cemetery, $259,767. Other revenue, $2,175. Other financing sources transfers, $475,252. Total proprietary revenues, $3,498,427. Expenditures, sanitation, $1,758,477. Recycling, $257,596. Stormwater, $389,985. Landfill, $136,000. Cemetery, $323,208. Transfers to other funds, $631,288. Total proprietary expenditures, $3,496,554. Section 2, authorizes the mayor, except as provided in the Georgetown purchasing policy adopted in Municipal Order 11028, to enter into any contracts or agreements necessary to fulfill the operation of city government within the allocations listed in this ordinance. Section 3 provides that if any section, subsection, sentence, clause, or phrase of this ordinance is for any reason held unconstitutional or otherwise invalid, such infirmity shall not affect the validity of the remaining portions of this ordinance. Section 4 provides that all ordinances or parts of ordinances in conflict with this ordinance are hereby repealed. The full text of ordinance is available for examination in City Clerk's Office, 100 Fort Street, Georgetown, Kentucky, 40324, or at www.georgetownky.org. Publicly introduced and read for the first time June 16, 2014.
First reading. Municipal order approving contract amendment with Kenvirons.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. This is for a capital project removing the leachate ponds at Simmons landfill. This is budgeted. This is amending a contract which already exists. Kenvirons, every year we have a contract with them to perform sampling, leachate analysis, as well as design services. So the quote they gave me for removing these ponds, which includes surveying, design, which includes construction plans, technical specs, best management practices, regulatory agency correspondence, and CQA. The estimated cost is just over $24,000. These ponds, once we put in the sanitation lines that run to the wastewater treatment plant, these ponds no longer collect leachate. They go to tow drains before they go to the treatment plant. So these are not only just a liability, but we pay to have them inspected and samples taken all every year, every month. Also, the intent is to try and get rid of our division of waste management permit with the state.
Question. Ready to read.
Motion for approval.
Motion by Mark.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you.
Kyle, before you sit down, I hit you with something. Here, we're into June, and Dominion Homes has done absolutely nothing to Willow Lane. I was sent pictures there during our last little rain event. It's a mess. It's running down over, all the way down the alleyway there where the apartments are. Can you please get an update from them so we can take it back to?
I spoke with Mark on Friday.
Okay.
Planning and zoning recently received approval from the property owners to move forward with using those easements. So once Mark was notified of that, he notified Strang to finalize it.
So how long are we talking?
The problem when we're not in control of the design firm.
My question.
Can you push the pedal down on them a little bit? We're due to have more rain, and it's just gonna, I mean, it's worse now, I think, than it was originally, because it's coming all the way down into Pocahontas, or Seminole.
I'll give him another call.
Please.
I just have one more question on the animal control, if I can, for just a moment.
Okay.
On the ordinance. You said that there were no finable penalties. The sections we crossed out were civil penalties. Is that different from the from the penalties that we imposed tonight, or at least are going to impose?
What we're proposing tonight is criminal.
Criminal, okay. So why couldn't they enforce the civil penalties?
That's a question that Glenn can answer. I mean, civil penalties involve us suing someone, essentially. I mean, you, without a provision for an OV, like a code violation, it's essentially me taking them to court over a barking dog. That's how a civil penalty would be enforced.
All right, thanks. Motion for adjournment.
Motion for adjournment, second.
Mark got his say so, what nobody else
All in
did.
favor, aye?
He got his, they shut us all up.
See you Monday night.